Hi, everyone. Welcome to this amazing acting stream with Kathrin, Ere, and Madison. I've seen them all work, and their acting is incredible. Everyone, just let us know if you can hear us well, you can see us well. We'll be checking the chat. So, do you guys want to introduce yourselves first? Kathrin, do you want to go first?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Kathrin Heller. I am originally from Germany. I'm now an animator in London. I have been here for the past 4 years now. Yeah, actually, today is my anniversary, by the way, 4 years London.
Whoa!
Yeah,
Congrats.
I started out as a generalist in Germany, actually. I have 2 degrees that I did before that. And yeah, just always wanted to get into feature animation, and I'm really glad that I'm finally there. I've been working, since I've come to London, I've been working at Jellyfish, and now I'm at Double Negative on features that I'm unfortunately not allowed to talk about. But yeah.
NDAs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Eric?
Oh, awesome. Sorry?
The amazing Ere?
The amazing Ere. No, that's the other Ere. My name is Ere Santos. I am currently a senior animator at Sony Pictures in Vancouver, beautiful BC, Vancouver, Canada. I have been here for the past 6 months, but before that, I was working with these lovely ladies at Jellyfish on Spirit. Before that, and I've been bouncing around a lot of different places. I was at DNEG for about a year. I was at MPC for about a year. And I started out just, instead of working backwards, I'll just start from the beginning. I worked, I got my start in the industry working as an intern at Pixar. And then I moved over to Sony to work on Hotel 3, Hotel Transylvania 3. And then I went back to Pixar for a really short time to work on a short film called Loop. And then I moved to London, and that's when I started bouncing around. So we kind of met each other from both ends. But yeah, right now I'm just trying to drink more water and sleep more. So that's where I'm at in my life.
Great advice.
Thank you. It's not advice, it's just what I'm trying to do with my life.
But I think a lot of people forget to just do the bare minimum of, oh yeah, keeping our bodies alive.
Water.
Oh my God. You were not kidding.
No.
Cool. So all of these people have amazing ways of doing their acting. I've seen their references. I'm pretty sure a lot of you already know Madison if you've been through AM. Most people have her reference. Most people have amazing animations thanks to her. So Maddie, do you want to talk a bit about your process?
Yeah, I can kind of talk like a little bit about kind of my general process. It's relatively simple of like how I do it. It's not super complicated. I'm very simple with how I go about acting. But my main thing that I don't like, I can't stress enough when I talk about like my specific acting process is subtext of a character and really getting into what they're thinking before you even shoot reference. Like that's the one thing I see a lot of students do is they'll just shoot reference. Like don't even think about it. As long as they learn the line, like they'll go for it. And my big thing that I kind of learned is like, I want to practice the line and know exactly what my character's thinking at any time. So that's my first thing I do. When I have a shot idea, I have, everything kind of nailed down what I want already. I go through and I will write out, the line verbatim of what the character's saying, if it's a dialogue shot. And then I go in and add the subtext underneath of, okay, if this character's saying this one thing of like, I shouldn't have done it. Well, what are they thinking? Is it something specific? And then I go in and say like, okay, maybe they're saying I shouldn't have done it, but they actually did want to do it. And so they're just saying this to please someone else. So I go in and I kind of write the subtext to fit the timing as well of like what they're thinking has to fit within the time that they're saying that dialogue. And I'll just kind of let that like ruminate in my head for a while before I even shoot reference, because I want to be able to think what the character's thinking and be able to say the line without thinking about memorizing the line. So one of my tips that I always recommend is learn your lip sync. Learn your line if you're going to lip sync to an audio for your acting specifically. And one thing that I do is if I have a line of audio, I'll play it and I'll just like do something else. I'll make coffee, I'll like clean, and I just will listen to it on loop, kind of psychotically a little bit, like just listen to the line over and over to just like really think about like what I want to do. And maybe even while I'm just there, I'll act it out without a camera, because sometimes I get good acting ideas while I'm acting without a camera. Because as soon as I put a camera up, it's like you're on, because it's like, oh, I'm being recorded. And I get like a little like, and so things don't come as naturally. But if I kind of have an idea already of just like acting it out and not have any eyes on me, like not even a camera, it kind of helps get those ideas out. And then from there, like once I really have the subtext of what I want the character to be thinking, I go, and that's when I like will do my first pass of reference. And I always do my reference in passes. I do my first takes, because a lot of times you'll find a lot of natural stuff happens acting wise, I find, in my first passes, but maybe they're not as refined. So in my first passes, it's usually my gut instincts of how I would react to it, which sometimes I want to go with, sometimes I want to stay completely away from it with, because that's sometimes when the cliche ideas in acting usually come out. So I go through, and I sometimes, even with my acting for my second and third passes of like my reference, I'll try to act it out completely different, like in a way that I don't want to. Maybe I don't think like maybe I'll act the character as a completely different subtext in the head that doesn't even make sense, but it gets you the acting that you want. So it just depends. It's kind of like a trial and error process for me. But a big thing that I try to think about when I'm also shooting a reference is I try to think of posing a little bit, of like choreographing my reference. And I come from a dance background and musical theater background, so everything with me is very like choreography heavy. Of I know I have certain beats I want to hit in my acting, so a lot of times I'll go through and I record very short chunks of reference. Like I do not let the camera sit. I know some people do that, like they'll like record for 10 minutes of like acting, and then they go through and like splice it up. But with me, I like to have little chunks because I like to know what's what. And so I'll go through and I'll like just kind of, after my first pass of like, I'll just shoot like maybe 10 takes of that line. And then I'll go in and I'll look for those little moments of things I like. Like I had one shot that I did about a year ago that was a guy sitting down at a table, and he was just getting, the shot was at first just internal dialogue of him getting angry at something, like internalizing what the girls just said to him. And so he was just sitting there on one of my acting takes, like he has like this glass, and I just had like this cool thumb movement. I hated everything else about the piece though, but I was like, ooh, that's really cool. I like that I have like this tension in my hand. I was like, I like the subtext that adds to like, he's still, and you're acting within one pose, but you just have that little bit of like tension with the hand. So then I'm like, okay, I like that. But then this third take, I really like my head accents of how I'm speaking through the character with my eyes. I was like, so that's cool. So my kind of process, which is very tailored to me, where I will take those things and then choreograph that in my next take of reference. So I'll be like, okay, I like the pose I did in this one. I like the hand thing I did in the first one. And I really like my facial acting in the fourth take. So then that's when, again, it's very ballet based, because I'm like, okay, this is just a dance. So I just need to put all these things together and act those out. But I find that can be hard at first when you're first learning acting and like trying to get in the character. There's so many things to worry about. It can be hard to try to remember those moments and try to like put them all together and mash them into one thing. But I found that really helps, especially I'll have when I'm working professionally and I'm showing reference to a director or my lead, and they say, I like this one, but I like what you do here, but I like that. And I hate Frankensteining reference together. So I kind of like taught myself how to just get it all, or at least a lot of it, in one take, because sometimes you are going to have takes that you can't recreate in that acting because it was a really natural moment or something. But yeah, that's kind of just my process of how I do it. And I spend, I would say, like 90% of my time in the subtext phase of like where I'm just trying to think through what the character's thinking, what happened before the scene, what happens after, even if we don't know, right? Just to get into the head of the character, because I think a lot of times you think like, oh, the character's right here, but sometimes what happened before can influence the acting of the character, right? If the character was really angry before, they're still coming from that place in that headspace, and then they're changing into it. So you want to be able to show that through your acting. So if you don't know where your character has been before or after the shot, even if it's a standalone shot, it's not going to read, I found. Or it will be a little bit of flat acting. So I always try to think of that, come up with a story, if it's your own personal shot and you don't have a whole production telling you exactly what the story is before and after, having that helps a lot. So I spend the majority of my time in that phase, just trying to figure out who the character is and being able to answer at any point in my shot, whether it's, dialogue or it's just a pantomime shot, a reaction shot, I try to be able to answer any second. And like any of my work, I could tell you what the character's thinking at that moment, because I'm thinking it as I'm acting it out. Because I find that's the biggest thing is not, especially when you're starting out with acting, is not thinking about the fact that you're acting, right? It's like reactive acting. I don't know if that makes sense, but basically like if you have this dialogue in your head of what the character's thinking, especially for like reaction shots, it will show through a lot better if you're just doing it over and over again, having those thoughts in your head that may not be exactly what the character's saying, but they're feeling it. So that will show through when you're acting. But that's where I spend the majority of my time. And like, I can't stress it enough to students, especially when they're starting out, or just anyone that's especially doing personal shots, because it's your direction and you can have the character think whatever you want because it's your character. So having that is invaluable and really helps you get into the head of the character to make acting easier, because it's hard and you can't be the character, right? But you can try, and it helps a lot to have that subtext. That's where I spend majority of my time. But yeah, that's just a quick, I don't know if that's what you wanted, Sin, but just like a quick little rundown of like, I don't know, like how I approach shooting reference for a shot. But
Yeah, that's great. Do you also think about subtext? Let's say you have a shot without audio. It's either pantomime or more body mechanics. Do you also get into the character in the same way?
For sure. Yeah. So I still do the same exact like process. I write down sometimes, even like a lot of times it's just in my own head, but I will sometimes, if it's a longer shot, if there's no dialogue, I write down an internal monologue of like there's a script of like what this character's thinking. And I make sure that like I'm thinking it when I'm acting out, you know, especially that helps a lot for reaction shots, I find, because you get some more natural acting. Like if I'm sitting there think I need to look scared, you're going to get like your stereotypical scared face. But if you're thinking, I may not have enough food to survive next winter, you're going to get a different face. Like maybe the character's like having this internal dialogue. So yeah, I definitely do that for pantomime shots. I think it's almost even more important for pantomime shots because it's so much is you can't rely on the dialogue to tell the story, right? So it has to be all on the acting. So yeah, I definitely approach them the same way.
Yeah, that's great, because also when you start working and you're not doing personal shots, a lot of your shots are not going to have audio, and you still need to get into character. So
yeah,
that's awesome. Thank you. So Kathrin, do you want to go next? I know you have a lot of things prepared.
I have something small prepared. So Cynthia asked me to talk about my approach when what I do when I start planning to act for a shot, when I plan to shoot some reference. And so I have come up with this kind of technique, this little approach to shooting reference that I thought would be really helpful to share, because so shooting reference and acting in front of a camera brings difficulties and challenges with it, and because it is a creative process, and a lot of people always ask, what can I do to improve my acting? What can I do to make it better? And the unfortunate truth is that there is no like concrete answer to that. But the good news is that there are some guidelines that we can use and that can help us get on track. And like I said, I have this one technique that I use that has helped me a lot in the past that I would like to talk about. For that, I have brought a little sequence that I worked on in my last feature. And there's one shot in particular that I would like to talk about that I have shot reference for. Not now. I'm going to share that later. Because I first need to talk about two other things. You don't need to share the screen yet.
Cool. Sorry, guys. This is my first time doing this with more people, so it's okay.
You're doing great, Sin. You're doing great. No, so the first thing that I wanted to talk about are emotions. So emotions are a spectrum. That's something that we really have to understand, because we normally don't feel just one single emotion at a time, but emotions are connected to other emotions. For example, what I mean is when we are happy, we are not just plainly happy. We are happy because maybe we feel excited, or because we feel relief or content. Instances where we would feel just one emotion at a time these are more like instinct-based and impulsive. For example, the fright that we feel when we're startled. But for the rest of the time, emotions come in a group. And then it's that one of these emotions is usually the prominent one that we can show and that people see on the outside. It's like on the surface. But the other emotions that come along with it, they are often not immediately visible and they are below the surface. So in acting, what you do and what we as animators also have to do is to show the audience the emotions that are beneath the surface by sprinkling them into our performances. I'm going to give you an example. Imagine a middle-aged mother who is waiting up late for her teenage son to come home. They both had agreed he must be home by 11 p.m. It's now pushing midnight and she's angry, okay? You can see it on her face. Maybe she's pacing up and down in the kitchen, you know, fuming. And that is what we can see on the surface. Now, if this was our scene and this was our character that we had to shoot reference for and animate, it would be our job now first to find out why exactly she is angry. Why is anger her reaction to this situation? Who is she? What is she like? So the first thing you would do is you would look at the script, of course, and read as much about her as you can to get an idea of her character. You look at the latest edit of the animatic, and obviously you ask a director. Another way, though, to find out what the other emotion below the visible surface is would be to look at something that is called subtext, as Madison has already talked about earlier. And that brings me to my second point, which is incredibly important to become aware of the subtext. I don't know who of you know this already. I don't mean to be patronizing or anything. Just to sum it up really, really quick, subtext is what you mean or what you really mean when you say something. So Cynthia, if you ask me, how am I doing? And I say, I'm fine. I say the words, I'm fine. But the way I say it tells you that what I really mean is that I'm not fine and I don't want to talk about it. Okay, so when we start planning our shot and prepare to shoot reference, it is again very, very important to first understand what the subtext is of what is being said in the scene. And because finding the subtext by revealing what the character really mean, it just also gives you the hint of what emotions the character is feeling, not just on the surface, but below the surface. So if we go back to the scene now with the angry mother and we imagine her husband coming up to her and saying, are you coming to bed? And her response is, no, I can't. I'm going to stay up a bit longer. Then the way she delivers this particular line gives us the information that we need to know. So as obvious as it sounds, then this affects our acting choices. And if she says it in a way, so we imagine she's angry, but she says it in a way like, no, I can't, I'm going to stay up longer. This is showing her emotion, the emotion that is like below the surface. And in this case, it would be worry. So from that, we can establish that she's angry on the surface because below the surface, she's scared. She's worried something might have happened to her son. Maybe he's injured or drunk or he needs help. And she's really worried about it. But this worriness and not knowing what to do, this is what makes her angry. Angry about being helpless and not knowing what to do and just, you know, all that stuff. What I'm trying to say is that by looking at the subtext and finding out what our character really means when they say what they say, it just helps you to find more dimensions in the acting, you know, in the performance. We sprinkle this emotion that we discovered under the surface, the fear, into the anger performance, and that just gives us depth and also, it just helps us understand the character better. In reality, it can be really tough sometimes to find out what the subtext is. It's not always 100% clear. Sometimes we don't have enough information from when we're working on a production because you know, shots aren't worked on in chronological order, or we just don't know enough information. And what our job is then is that we take the amount of information that we have and we interpret it as much as we can. And then we film different types of reference and we show this as a suggestion to the director. So now I would be sharing my screen and I'm going to show you the reference that I shot for a shot in my last feature. Bear with me. So just to give you some context, in this scene, the main character, Lucky, she was just off riding a horse, Spirit. And the thing is, she was really excited about it and she really wanted to do this, but her father specifically told her not to do it. And when she just did it, she nearly died. And he finds her and he's clearly upset. And then she gets upset by his reaction. Yeah, so I'm just going to show you the sequence first.
Girl here,
Mostly
under control.
exciting, and then
Lucky you are lucky you didn't get yourself killed.
I know, but I was just gonna ride him in the corral,
You
and
shouldn't have been anywhere near that horse.
Come on, troublemakers.
So when I started to prepare for this shot, this is the one that I'm going to show you. My question was, why is Lucky really upset? Why this reaction and not any other? Like I said, we didn't animate this film in chronological order. I actually didn't have a super clear vision yet of what Lucky was like and her personality and all. So I just went ahead with all the information I had of her at that point, and from that concluded 3 different solutions as to why she was upset at her father's reaction. So by that, I mean, I gave her 3 different subsurface emotions. So we already know the emotion at the surface is that she's upset, and I have 3 thumbnails here that hopefully convey a little bit what I was trying to do here. These are 3 different versions that I showed to the directors to find out what performance they would like best. In the first one, I tried to give her the reason for her to be upset, that she's disappointed. You're going to see this in a sec. I'm going to play all the 3 clips. But in the first one, I thought that Lucky and her father have a very difficult relationship up until this point in the movie. And maybe she was hoping that by sharing her excitement with her dad, they could connect. And now she is disappointed that he had blocked that. In the second one, I let shock be the emotion that sparked her upsetness. So she's only 12 years old. Probably she didn't think this far ahead and was completely in the moment until her father shook her out of it. And in the third one, I thought maybe she's super frustrated with how the relationship with her dad is going. She was excited about finally writing Spirit, but of course her dad had to come in and ruin it all. So I'm going to play the samples now, and I'm going to play them twice so you can have an actual look at it.
I know, but I was just gonna ride him in the corral,
You
and
shouldn't
then
have been anywhere near that horse.
So I'm going to play this again. As it says here in the corner, this is like, I gave disappointment as an inspiration for her to become upset.
I know, but I was just gonna ride him in the corral,
You
and
shouldn't
then
have been anywhere near that horse.
Okay. So the second one
I
is
know,
she's
but I
in
was
shock
just gonna ride him in the corral,
You
and
shouldn't
then
have been anywhere near that horse.
because she wasn't expecting that reaction from her father.
I know, but I was just gonna ride him in the corral,
You
and
shouldn't
then
have been anywhere near that horse.
And third
I
one,
know, but I
frustration.
was just gonna ride him in the corral,
You
and
shouldn't
then
have been anywhere near that horse.
I know, but I was just gonna ride him in the corral,
You
and
shouldn't
then
have been anywhere near that horse.
So what happened was, in the end, then the directors actually asked me to combine the first one, disappointment and shock. And I was obviously way off with the third one, with the frustration. But the benefit of showing such different version was really that hopefully one of them was something that the directors liked or had in mind. And also by showing the directors something that they don't like gives you a better understanding of where to go in the future and what to do next. So I'm just going to show you what this looked like in the end then.
I know, but I was just gonna ride him in the corral,
You
and
shouldn't
then
have been anywhere near that horse.
Okay, and that was my approach.
Amazing. I'm pretty sure, was that the one I always tell the story when Kathrin was like, I have these different emotions for this one shot. Can you help me choose? Because you actually didn't just shoot one reference for each. I think it was this shot that you had shot more than one reference, and from there you chose. So you had a lot of variation in your acting, even within those sub emotions.
Mhm. Yeah, that was kind of what I was also trying to get at. That like obviously I had shot way more reference than this, but in the end I always tried to narrow it down and really give like 3 very different approaches to when I show that to the directors, for them to tell me which direction is like nearest to their vision, you know. Yeah, because sometimes you can be way off, or sometimes you're really close, and that's just how to get there.
Yeah.
Showing like 3 versions that are very similar is usually actually a bit counterproductive. I would not do this in the first round. I would probably do this in the second round, and then maybe not even show it to the directors anymore, but to my lead or supervisor. Just, okay, the directors have already picked a version that they like. I have like 3 very similar ones. Could you help me like define the acting a little bit more at this point?
Yeah, I love it. I'm learning a lot from this. I'm like, whoa, there's so much to acting that I didn't know. So thank you so much. That was super, super cool. For anyone, if anyone has any questions in particular, we'll ask them at the end. So keep sending them in the chat and we'll go over them. Ere, do you want to talk about your acting?
No.
Okay, then bye.
Cool.
Stream
Yeah.
over.
Bye. Have fun. I'm just gonna. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. So my approach is very similar to Kathrin and Madison's, where it starts out mostly with the subtext and everything like that. But before that, for me, I try to spend at least 40% of the time that I spend working on a shot is spent in the planning phase, because my philosophy is that the more you plan, the easier you can just hit the ground running and just animate the shot as quick as possible. So the way that I professionally tackle shots is very similar to the way that I personally tackle shots. Whereas because of my theater background, I love the whole thought of like rehearsal, and then after rehearsal you memorize the lines and all that kind of stuff. So I try to use that same process in my animation, where I start off by, first of all, just listening to the audio, getting the information from the director. If the director says, oh, the character needs to feel this way in the shot, and in the scene, the character's doing this and that, in the movie this is where they're emotionally at in the movie, I try to absorb as much information as I can. I'm taking on all the notes that I can, and then when I start on my shots, I start to think about, okay, what's the first thing I need to do is break down my shots. So again, if there's dialogue in the scene, fantastic. If there's not, that's totally fine as well. The same process applies. But I take my dialogue, I write it out on a piece of paper, and like I said, the same thing I did with theater acting, I would then go ahead and mark up on the paper. I'd find out where my phrases are, where my pauses are, why the pauses are there, what the character's thinking in those pauses. And then usually what I'd do is that I'd have a space in between each of the lines, and under the lines is where I write in the subtext. So with each phrase, I'll try and find out what is a character trying to say with this phase, right? So again, if you take the example of the angry wife or something like that, it's like if the husband asks her, oh, how are you doing? And then she says, I'm fine. What she's saying is, I'm fine, but what she's really saying is, you know what you did. You know what I mean? And I like that. I like the fact that you can say one thing, but mean another. And that's, to me, the joy of acting and the joy of performance. From there, I then take all that information that I've done my homework, and I take all that information and then I start my acting. Okay, so the first thing that I do is that I rehearse my shot. So like I learn the dialogue, I learn the whole line, then I go into my reference room or reference area and to start acting it out with the camera off. I just start acting it out over and over again to kind of see what feels right for the moment. If I'm going to be sitting down or standing up or on my head, on my back, in water, whatever feels right for the moment, I go ahead and then I just start rehearsing it. And when I start to feel like I have some sort of what's the word? Like when I start to feel like I have some sort of cohesive thoughts coming up, then I start turning on the camera, and then I start doing the line over and over again. And I do that for about 10 to 15 minutes, just recording myself doing the audio over and over again. And then I turn off the audio and then just start doing it just by myself, just by saying it by myself. And I do that for another 10 to 15 minutes. And then once I've done that, I then turn off everything again. And then I start to think about what, if I could boil down the entire shot or sequence, even if I could boil down everything to a single phrase or a single word, you know, what would that word be? So let's take this example, for instance, again, with the wife. Like if the subtext for the entire shot is, you know what you did, you know, then I'm just going to start acting out the entire shot just by saying, you know what you did, literally saying, you know what you did over and over again. So I could be like, you know what you did, you know what you did, you know what you did, you do, you know, that sort of thing. And that allows me to kind of take away all the excess, all the fat from the dialogue and just focus on what is truly important in the shot. And that allows me to kind of break things down to their basic parts. And then once I've done that, I go to my computer and I watch everything over again, all 45 to an hour's worth of footage. And I kind of have my notepad and I take down notes of timestamps of things that I liked. I take down either timestamps of like, oh, I like the little gesture I did there, or I like the take I did at this timestamp, et cetera, et cetera. And then I go back and I film it again, and I film my favorite takes. I film what I liked about my favorite takes, trying to remember what I did. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of filming a bunch of reference and then splicing everything together, because what I found that does for me is that it creates a really unnatural performance, right? Because if I take what I love about a bunch of different takes and I put them all together, it's not necessarily going to feel realistic, or it's not necessarily going to feel believable all the time, you know? So I want to make sure that if I splice together the takes that I like, I need to make sure that it still feels natural. So I go back and I film it again, trying to remember what I did in those takes, and what doesn't feel natural, I just don't do it and I cut it out, you know? I try always, again, once I've done all that again, I try to think about what is important about the shot. How can I reduce my shot to the most specific parts? And that allows me to go ahead and kind of break down to the specific parts. I don't remember what I was going to say before. But after that, then I take all that reference and then I try and find where my 3 favorite takes are. And once I found the 3 favorite takes, those are the takes that I'm going to show the director. I'm not going to show the director or the soup or whatever, but I'm not going to show my soup 9 different takes just because I don't personally like giving other people that much choice, because I'm a control freak. But that's another story for another day. But yes, I try to show my director or supervisor my reference just once, and then I jump right into blocking. I either show my reference with my blocking or just by itself. And then that allows me to kind of get to the point of what I'm trying to do. Because as much as it's fun to kind of like have all these different conversations with the directors and everything like that, what's important to me, as well as like creating a good performance, is doing my work on time, you know? And I find that the more you have conversations and the more you give them conversations to have, then the more time you're going to spend on the shot. I like to say, here's what you've told me, here's what I'm giving you. I don't like to really say, here's all these different things you can choose from, look at it, and then, you know, anyway. So that's a personal thing for me. But after that, then, you know, I try to keep my showings to 5 showings and nothing more. Hopefully, if I can get a shot final in 3 showings, perfect. But usually that's not realistic in the world. I try to do my reference is going to be 1 showing that I show just to my supervisor, and then I'll show my blocking with reference maybe to the director, and then I show my IP pass to the director, which is just kind of like spline work, and then I show my polish pass either to, depending on the type of production. Some productions you don't show polish to the director, some productions you do. So I would then go show them my polish pass, and then once that's all done, hopefully they approve it, and then move on, and I go and sit down at my desk, put on music, and just polish for a week. And that is essentially my process.
Nice. It's really cool. Do you want to share the things that you wanted, like something from your reel, or?
We could, but I just kind of wanted to leave that as if there's something I wanted to refer back to, then we could, but then
Perfect.
yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. Um, I'm learning so much. That's why you guys are so good. If you see Spirit Spirit Untamed is the movie that we worked with Kathrin and Ere, and any shot that is very subtle acting, or basically the character has actual emotions and you're like, wow, that's very good, it's theirs. So yeah, go back and watch it. So we have a bunch of questions that people have sent, and if anyone wants to send any more questions, feel free to post them in the chat. I'm going to just have them for whoever wants to reply to the questions. They are not addressed to anyone specific. I think you've kind of gone over this a little bit, but one of the questions that I think a lot of people are wondering is, what do you do to get into character? Like, for example, I remember, Kathrin, you had a shot where Lucky was crying. I think it was Lucky was crying. How did you get into, because the reference was actual tears, like, so for example, because I know that you all went over the subtext and what you do to actually analyze a shot and get the good stuff, but what gets you actually in the mental space?
That's a really tough question, and I really hate the fact that probably a big part of my answer is I don't know. It's just kind of that it's like based on instinct a little bit with me. I just really like this part of animation. I have to say though that for this one particular shot that you're referring to, Sim, what I did was actually, so Lucky was crying in that shot because it was a very emotional moment in the film. And I'm just somebody who cries very easily anyway at films that are emotional. So what I did, I just watched the sequence over and over, and there was music in there already that made it emotional. And I don't know, it was just by watching it over and over and just trying to like feel with the character on every step on the way. That's just kind of how I got into it until the very shot that was needed where I tried to film. Yeah, and then I don't know if that makes sense, but basically by watching the sequence over and over and really trying to like emphasize with the character what she's going through, it was quite the emotional journey. And another thing that I did actually, because I find it almost impossible to cry on commando, so like I just can't do that. But what I did was I had the camera set up next to me, and as I was watching the scene and as the shot was coming up and I started to tear up, I was filming it as I was live, like going through that situation. So it's I guess what I'm trying to say is like sometimes you have to help yourself a little bit and cheat a little bit here and there to get what you want out of it, because I'm by no means professional in acting or so, and I have to help myself. And I was actually crying in that shot, but I also, for example, I poured a little bit of contact lens solution into my eyes just to make it visually stronger.
I love it. All the
Can I touch on that as well a little bit?
Yeah, of course.
No, because I think, there's a shot that I had to do as well that the character was crying in it. And around that time, Marriage Story had just come out, like the Netflix movie. And there's that one scene where like they're arguing and then he punches a wall or something. Every time I watch that scene, it just breaks me. And I just start bawling my eyes out, and I have no other movie does that to me except for that one. So I remember like every time I wanted to do it, like reference for that shot, I would sit there watching Marriage Story on my phone. And I'm like, okay, film. And like all these tears are starting coming and snot bubbles. It was amazing.
Yeah. Sometimes we really have to cheat it.
Yeah. But I find that like trying to, as sadistic as this sounds, but trying to like when you're going through really tough times or when you're going through really happy times, even just noting it down and just kind of keeping a mental note or keeping just kind of keeping note of how you feel in certain instances can really, really help you to kind of recall them when you need to recall them. Because that's another trick that they use for theater, is trying to like, okay, what is my, like, I remember the feeling I was feeling when I was going through this situation. So I start remembering that situation, and that kind of brings out the emotion for me. If it's joy, anger, fear, sadness, et cetera, you know?
But if I may chime in at that very point. I don't know where I heard this. I can't quote my source here, but I heard that this is actually, I don't want to say a bad way of acting, but what I heard, on the contrary, what makes a good actor or a good actress is to actually go through the emotion that is like in the script at that very moment. So if you see an actor on screen, and I don't know if it's like some war movie or so, and they're holding like their dying brother in their arm and they're sobbing they're like sobbing and crying their eyes out because they're losing their brother. A good actor would actually go through the emotions of someone losing their brother. So the tears that you see and the pain and everything, that's quite real. It's actually a theory of mine, is also why like actors at some point they just seem a bit like crazy, and I think it's like going through all these really wild emotions that they go through in their films because they just can't separate from that anymore. But I think it's a really clever idea for anybody who's obviously not a professional actor, which is like most of us, to like bank these moments and try to remember and try to trigger this emotional reaction. But at the same time, I think it's also, if you want to try that, really sit down and think, how would I really emotionally react to this situation? If I was actually in this situation, if this was actually happening to me, and you might get something really, really special out of that, you know?
Yeah, that's really cool. Sorry, I was just remembering of when we shot Reference together, and I was wondering if also for getting into character, you actually kind of physically get into character, because I remember one time Kathrin and I had to shoot some Reference, and I honestly I'm very new to all of this, and Kathrin was like, no, put on these boots so that you can get the feeling of how she runs, and like maybe you tie your hair the same way. Like, do you guys do any of that to also help you, maybe also with the physicality?
Sometimes I try to do this exercise where if it's a character that I completely is different from who I am, then try to do this exercise where I just walk around the room like them, thinking like, oh, how would this character walk? And just kind of walk around the room for about 5 minutes. Like, if you see me filming Reference, you think I'm crazy. But like, I just walk around the room, kind of be like, oh, hello, and then kind of greeting people as the character. And then I turn on the camera and just start filming. But then I also try to film until I forget that I'm filming. And that allows me to kind of not worry so much about the space and angles and all that kind of stuff. And that gives me truthful reactions. Clothing helps. I just don't have that many clothes. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I used to do that too, especially when I was starting out learning animation, because I came from an acting background, but not animator. So like putting those two things together was strange for me. And like, I would do that too, like with the character I was working with, I'd be like, I'm going to like take, like I kind of mentioned to like before, is like, I'm going to take a break and I'm going to act like that character doing that thing. Like, how would, like, I'm going to brush my teeth. How would this character brush her teeth? I don't know, like, it's a good exercise to be like, how would, and why, and like ask yourself why, like, well, she would do this, like, because sometimes you'll do stuff intuitively, like, oh, this character would definitely do this, and you're like, well, why? And like asking yourself that and working it through kind of helps you get into that mindset where kind of like you're talking about, like, you don't have to think about acting while you're acting because you're just in their mindset because you are already kind of proven their own mindset to yourself. So it just becomes natural. And that's when you get really good takes, is when you have that ability to kind of just slip into that character and not have to think about the specific things that you need to keep in mind for that character. It really helps. And little things like that, like exercises like that, can help you kind of work through it too.
That's awesome. That kind of goes into a question that somebody asked, because they were thinking what you should prioritize when shooting Reference. Like they said, oh, for body mechanics, at least when you animate, you make sure that your poses hit a clear line of action, good use of negative space. Do you have that in mind when you do acting, or you just focus mainly on the character and their state of mind?
So I personally, I read that question, you sent me that question in advance, and I thought about it for a while. And honestly, it just always depends. It depends on what the shot calls for. There have been times where I've been drawing thumbnails, for example, in advance, so that I knew which poses I wanted to hit. But I think, and that also comes back to a tip that I got a while ago, which I found very important. I think at first I would focus on the performance, to stay true to it and to make it authentic and to make it really good. And then later, when you take that reference and you bring it into the animation scene, obviously you're not going to take everything from that reference, and at some point you have to divorce yourself from this reference as well. There's only so much you're going to work with it anyway, and then later it is about making the shot appealing and sticking to our laws of animation and all that. So I think, but the thing that we get from the reference that we don't get from other things is the performance, and it's this genuinity in this performance. So I think obviously you can try and hit certain poses. Obviously you can try and pay attention to some of these details, but I would still prioritize the performance, I think, at least in the reference stage, because everything else, the cleaning up and the retiming, and so that comes in the animation scene later. That's just my personal opinion, though. I'm open to criticism.
Is anyone going to challenge Kathrin?
Challenge you. No, I'm kidding. No, I agree.
Cool. So you mentioned that it was some advice that you got. What's the best advice you got in terms of your performance, acting, animation, all of you in your life? Wow, no, guys, not that too many.
I just gave mine away. That you can't just so desperately stick to the reference throughout until the polishing phase, that you have to at some point let it go, completely abandon it and just focus on what you have in your scene and try to work with this. I was thinking, I don't remember. I don't know.
Yeah,
That's
kind of
cool.
interesting. Actually, last week, because I'm taking classes right now at Kyosho with Sean Lee, and Sean was talking about acting, because we were talking all about ideas and that. And he said something that I never really thought about before, but he was talking about intention within your shot for acting. And he was like, if you have audio and you're talking to it, which this blew my mind, and it's such a simple thing when you hear it. It's when you're talking about audio, you're hearing one thing, the tone of the audio can dictate a lot about how you act. Don't let it. And I was like, oh, interesting, because a lot of times I do, if I have audio, I will kind of act to it, those beats, those phrasing, that pause that's already built in that you can't change, right? And that's the difference between animation acting versus theater acting or acting for film or TV, is you can't change that. That's just there. So acting to that, but also not marrying yourself, you're acting to the dialogue in that respect. So he was using an example of you can act it one way different from how don't let your audio dictate how you act it, which to me was kind of a weird, it's kind of a weird thing to think about. It's very abstract, and I don't explain it as good as Sean does, but it was really interesting just to hear that. And now I'm thinking about acting differently in terms of, if I have something audio, I don't pause or I don't emphasize with head shake, the exact moment that I hear it in the audio. Putting it either before or after can actually really make it interesting, because then you're not hearing the acting that you're seeing. So it makes some contrast. That's really a useful tool to be able to use when you can, and not overusing it. You don't want your audio to be completely off from your acting, right? You don't want something like that if someone's talking, but that was an interesting piece of acting advice I got recently. But.
Yeah, that's really cool. That kind of I've been shooting reference for a shot that I have to do at work, and the character is very upset, and the character is also singing, so there's a lot of emphasis in some of the words and some of the phrases. And of course, some of my acting was a little bit more overact because of that emphasis that the audio gave me. But then I also took a break. I sometimes like to take a bit of time from my reference and see it from a time perspective when I'm not in that specific mindset. Maybe I'm in a different one, because I don't have a specific method of how I get into the mindset. Sometimes another day, maybe I look at it with different eyes. And then I looked and I was like, maybe it would actually feel better if it wasn't with so much emphasis. And I did it, even though this song has that emphasis. The director really loved that reference because it was maybe more heartfelt, more emotional. So I think I understand what you mean about not hitting everything, even though the audio is there. Even though most times, if the audio is there, it's I should use it. But yeah, sometimes it's better not to.
Yeah.
Piece of advice. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, Maddie, I think you said that earlier, that sometimes when you have the subtext down of your dialogue, that you abandon the dialogue altogether. And I think, Ere, you said that, just that you keep saying the subtext over and over and that you act on this. And obviously you're not going to use that audio at all later, but that gives you a very different approach to your performance as well. But like actually acting out what you mean to say. That is something that I learned a while ago that I also found super helpful.
Yeah, that makes sense. Ere, were you going to say something and we cut you off?
She said it right for me.
Sorry.
Cool. So going into an opposite thing, what do you think is the worst possible things that we do that we need to avoid in acting shots?
Copying reference. I am very, very passionate about this, and I will shout it from the mountaintops. Don't copy your I know people will disagree with me. Do not copy reference. Reference your reference. That's why it's called reference. I think it's really, really important to kind of think about what you're trying to do in your reference. Why? Again, like with what Sean is saying about the intention. What is the intention behind every single action that you're doing? You know, even if it's down to just kind of like you're twiddling your fingers. Why? Why would that character do that in that moment? And then you find out why that is, and that allows you to kind of make informed decisions. You know, like on Spirit, I animated a lot of Lucky. I'm not a little girl, right? So I can't follow my reference completely. I'm not going to be able to be as truthful to the performance if I kind of just took my mind away from what my reference is doing, took it away, and just focus on what the character needs to do in the scene. And it's not, I understand, can be a very, very like tricky thing to get your head into, the whole concept of like, oh, what would the character do in this moment? But it's like, if you think about it in a logical sense, what has a character done before? What will the character do? Okay, cool. That can allow me to know a little bit more about this person. And as animators, we're supposed to be master observers, right? So we're supposed to be able to use our observational skills to be able to apply whatever, you know, action the character is supposed to be doing in that moment, is my opinion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think also
never follow reference.
Yeah, copying. A lot of people also copy reference one-to-one, and animation is not rotoscoping. There's things that you push aside from the acting. You push your pose, your line of action, everything. If you copy one-to-one, then why even do it? So I agree.
100%.
A really important question, guys. Someone asked, can I get a role in a live action movie as an actor if I send the refs from my shots?
I'm curious. I'm very
Yeah, I wanted to say, like,
try.
Can you tell me if it worked?
Create a demo reel of reference and then send it to a studio. Like, hey, here's my spec, whatever. It's whatever.
Right.
Isn't there
Hire me
this
as an
trend?
actress, not
Isn't there this
not an
trend?
animator.
Isn't there this trend on TikTok now that like some people just like lip sync to like a scene from some TV show or something?
Yeah.
And they're like, I think the actors.
Yeah.
It's a bit like that, isn't it?
Yeah, now somebody mentioned TikTok. Apparently like there's a lot of people shooting reference using audio. I think it's really cool though, because you see a lot of different takes for the same audio that are completely different, and that's what everyone brings a little bit of a different thing to each character. I thought it was pretty interesting. Also this one is actually an important question. Does it get easier?
It gets more manageable.
I'd say
Less chaotic, I'd say. Like for me, you know, like you start out and it seems so overwhelming because you're trying to keep track of so many things all at once. You still have to do that, and that's still, I wouldn't say it gets easier, but like I think you said, Eric, like it gets manageable. I think that's the best way to describe it. I don't think it gets easier, at least not for me yet, but I'm still a baby animator, so I don't know. But
Yeah, I think also sometimes a good thing to do that I've done with this too is if there's someone who's really good at a specific character and you're in production and you need reference, don't like be nice about it and also help out, but ask like, hey, do you have time maybe to help me out with some reference? If they say no, don't be like, oh no, how dare you. Be like, okay. But for example, Kathrin was so good at Lucky that one time I was struggling, and it was a body mechanics shot, but my movements were, as my director said, maybe I'm too Latina and I dance too much. Which I was like, And so I was like, hey, Kathrin, do you have like maybe 5 minutes to shoot some reference? And it was perfect. It was exactly what I needed. Or I needed reference but of Jim, the father, doing something very emotional. That was a very short lines. I was like, hey, Ere, do you have some time for me? And he graciously did, and it was so helpful. So also don't be scared of asking people for help, as long as you're not depending completely. I think you need to also know how to do it yourself, because sometimes there won't be people to help you out.
And just to piggyback on that, actually, there's something that I've been thinking about for the last couple of days that I thought might be worth mentioning here, which is, so on Spirit, that was a particular interesting example because the main character was, or is, a 12-year-old girl, and half of the animators on our team, if not more, were guys in their 20s and over. And what I found super interesting was that some of these guys were incredible at shooting reference for Lucky. Like it was authentic, it felt real, it felt genuine. And then there was the other half of that group that I felt like really struggled to get into that character, maybe that because they were really far removed from it and they really struggled. And what they did then is they very often went back to kind of cliche choices. So for example, they would have to be told when they did a walk cycle on Lucky, tone down the hips, she's too sexy here, she looks too old. And I was just thinking that, like, I don't think it was really their fault, and it's not like a crime or like a sin if you can't get yourself into the character that you're trying to animate. If it's too far removed from you, if maybe you're not the body type. For example, if like I had a couple shots where it was Lucky's father moving about, and when I did it and I would have like applied my reference to the animation, it would have looked like a woman trying to impersonate a man, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. And so what I did, I just thought, okay, I just have to go and speak to a colleague now and ask them to do it for me, because yeah, I don't know, like sometimes you can get into the character despite of being like completely removed from it and being very different from it. But it's also absolutely no shame to go and speak to your colleagues when you know they can do a better job for one reason or another.
Yeah. At the end of the day, the most important thing is that you have a good shot that fits into what the movie needs. So yeah, I agree. Yeah, I even recently I had a shot where a character, a male character, was on the floor and he had to stand up. And every time I did, I was like, oh my god, he looks so girly. So I messaged a friend of mine. I was like, can you just please? It's literally 5 minutes because it was a very short. Just like, please shoot some reference. And he did. And when I saw it, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, the way his center of gravity and everything moves is way different. So it's like, thank God. Now it looks okay. So yeah, I agree. So that kind of goes into there's a question of how much is too much in terms of shooting reference and acting. And I think maybe how would you tackle not getting into the cliches, or do you do first a pass with whatever cliches you feel like just to get them out, and then you get into other stuff? I'm guessing aside from the subtext and everything, sometimes you still end up getting into cliches.
I guess when just to go back to what I just said, like when I saw these particularly male animators falling back into these cliches a lot, I think the first thing maybe that I would try and do if I felt like I was too far removed from a character, I would just try and imagine that it wasn't that particular body type or it wasn't that kind of gender or whatsoever, but actually just look at the situation this character is in, try and understand their emotional reaction to whatever is going on, and just try to go from there, because I think this is what made this other group of guy animators so successful at shooting reference for Lucky, a 12-year-old girl. They just didn't approach it as like, oh, okay, I'm trying to like be a little girl now and try to do all my acting choices from there. But instead, I think what they did was they were just genuine to the situation and to the emotion and to what was going in that scene, and started from there. And then later, maybe they toned it down a little bit or adjusted their reference, but they didn't start off saying, I have to fit into this mold now that I actually have nothing to do with. And I think this is how they avoided falling into this cliche trap, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Really cool.
If you want to make a quick case for, there's nothing evil about cliches inherently, my opinion. And like a lot of people shout about like, oh, never do twinning, never do this, never do that. And the thing is, as long as you do it respectfully, as long as you do it in a way that's not necessarily cliche, you can still do it. Like a cliche is, oh, scratch the neck or whatever, you know, if they're thinking about something. But then there's the cliche is, I don't know, you know. But if you did it like, oh, what if he's scratching his neck with his thumb, or what if he's doing it like, you know, something, or he's doing it in an interesting way. He, especially, says they are doing it in a very interesting way. You are fine, you know. And like twinning, there's ways to do twinning where it's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm doing a lot of twinning now, you know, whereas it's, you know, it's not necessarily inherently a bad thing. It's just when it's your first choice, and that's what you're not really deviating from that, and you can't think of anything else. That is when I think it's a bad choice.
Yeah, that makes
Slide that in.
sense. Do you think you also take like, if there's because I was just remembering one time you helped me with some reference, I was struggling a lot to get a note that my lead had mentioned on one of the characters, like they needed to be doing more things, and you mentioned, oh, why don't you look at this movie? I can't remember exactly the movie that it was like, maybe you can do something like what the character is doing. Do you think you guys sometimes take also from movies that you've seen or TV shows and you try to apply to your animation if the situation allows it?
Billion%. Because people in movies are paid actors. I'm not a paid actor. So they are way better at acting than I am. So I would love to reference whatever they have to give.
We should start getting like our libraries of parts we like from actors.
I try to not watch a lot, but like I've been looking for audio because I'm doing like a new personal shot right now. And so I was looking through audio for James Spader, the actor. And so I was watching clips of him, and it's little things like, oh, he's really interesting how he moves his chin. Like his head accents, like when he talks, is like very much not with the place that you expect it to be. Like the way that he does it is really interesting. So like I incorporated that a little bit into my reference that I like been shooting for it. I'm like, oh, I like that, because you can kind of steal little things sometimes from the actors if you're watching the line that they're speaking. Obviously, don't copy exactly what the actor's doing, but sometimes you can find little things that match it because they're the ones speaking it. So you can find little things that you can like not steal. Well, yeah, steal. Go ahead and steal it. But like little things you can steal from like the actors or like actresses, or even just things that you can reference that you find interesting. Or like sometimes I've done that with multiple things. I'll be watching a movie and I'm like, oh, that's a really cool gesture of like how he like does this behind his ear, or like how someone like maybe will itch their face while they're talking. I'm like, oh, that's cool. So you can like keep kind of like a little mental image of different things that you do, and you can kind of build up like a library in your own head of gestures and things that you can use later or inspire you to do something similar to it, which I think is a really good way to build your library of motion in your head, if that makes sense.
Yeah, especially with, like you said, the tiny gestures that, like Ere was saying, doing something that is cliche but not in a cliche way. That's super interesting. So because you guys were saying like we are not paid actors, someone was asking, how do we improve our acting choices if we're not a good actor? Do we need to take an acting class? What do you think is a good way to approach it?
I always recommend to take an acting class, because if you want to learn acting, take an acting class. If you want to learn baking, take a baking class. You know what I mean? If you want to learn animation, take an animation class. And I think it's definitely highly, highly recommended. Yeah.
you were teaching improv, so I'm guessing that also helps to.
Oh,
yeah.
I can go on a tangent about improv.
Why do you think it's so helpful, improv for animation, for example?
Personally, I think in a nutshell, like improv has a lot of variability in not just with the actual art of animation, but then also the industry side of it. Like I think improv allows you to have a clear mind. So it allows you to kind of be given a prompt and you come up with an idea. Prompt, idea, and you have to be very, very quick with it. And I think that also that not only the artistic part of it, but then also the industry side of it too. Like if you are given, like if you're working on your shot and then all of a sudden the coordinator says, hey, your shot's due tomorrow, and you're like, oh, okay. You don't have time to be like, oh man, I'm so frustrated. But no, you get the prompt and you go. You don't have time to worry about anything else. And I think that's what's so lovely about improv. On top of the fact that it's a team sport, you know, stand up, you're by yourself. A lot of other things, you're by yourself. But with improv, it's like, if I start to fail, someone else helps pick me up, you know? And the whole thing is like, okay, let's look around the team, look for who is succeeding and let's lift them up. Let's, oh, cool. Because it's not about any individual, it's about the audience at the end of the day. It's about making sure the audience has the best possible show, you know? So how do we as individuals help each other give the audience the best show? And that to me is what, you know, making films and making TV shows, games, that's what it's about. It's not about any individual. It's about the product and it's about the audience connecting to the product, you know? So I think, like I said, I can go on a tangent about improv, but we'll stop it there.
No, but I think it's really useful. Like a few weeks ago, I went to an improv show. I had never been to one and it was such an experience because you see how, like you're saying, everyone is so quick. They were doing a thing where basically they told people to say things like, oh, name a place, and they would build the scenarios in their head, but each one had their own and still everything connected. Or for example, creating a story, one person would start telling a story and then they would point to another and they'd have to continue it, and everything had to make sense, and you always had to pay attention to what everyone else was doing, which I think you also need to do in animation, not just focus solely on your shots, but investigate what everyone else is doing and see, okay, who are the people who are doing the best? Okay, let's grab from that and like build on it rather than just, oh, I'm going to do my thing and that's it.
Always focusing on the overall narrative, you know? And there's a moment, if I can just say this a little quick, there's a moment in improv where you're standing on stage and then someone comes on and you know that they have an idea. My favorite thing is when they come on, but they're silent and you're just kind of like, okay. And in your head, if you're on stage and in your head, you're just like, I have absolutely no idea where this is gonna go. And you're just kind of standing there and you're just kind of like, am I supposed to be happy? Am I supposed to be sad? And then they say something and like, okay, I got it. And then you can start running with it. But it's that like moment of like, okay, we're both listening to each other. We're both like trying to find out what is about to happen, but we're staying on our toes. We're about to go, you know? And that's what I love so much about improv, and like that also lends itself to animation as well. But yeah.
That's really cool. I'd be terrified of doing that.
It's terrifying. It's fun. It gets more manageable.
Yeah, like exactly. After a while, I'm thinking you're ready for everything because you've been through horrible things. So someone asked them asked something that I'm not sure what it is, but just in case you guys know, he said that are any of you familiar with Alba emoting?
Alba emoting?
Yes. I'm
No.
guessing the answer is no. Okay, so no, we're not. I hope that answered your question. So something that goes more a little bit now that you have your reference, moving into animation, how do you decide what to exaggerate and what to ignore when you're in the process of translating your acting reference into your animation?
For me, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm taking over this conversation.
Go, no, like if you have something to say it.
I feel for me at least, it's I ask myself with every single gesture, with every single action, I say, if I take this out, will it have the same impact? You know, so like if I take out the action, will the shot have the same impact? If it's yes, then I take out the action. If it's no, then I really need this action, then I'm going to keep it in. And that's usually what I go. And I go through with everything again. If it's down to just kind of twiddling my fingers, if I say, is that action going to improve or take away from the shot? If it improves, then I keep it in there. If it's distracting, then I take it out. Even if it doesn't matter how cool of a flourishy animation thing it is, if it's distracting, take it out.
Makes sense. Also, sometimes less is more.
Yeah, I was just about to say, like, I find the biggest thing with my reference is I have to simplify. Like, sometimes I overact things, or things are just like unclear. Like, and I always ask myself with every action or like every acting beat in my reference, like, is there a way I can make this more clear in my animation? And that's when my simplicity and my clarification process, that's when it really kicks in, is when I'm doing that initial like blocking of like taking that reference, distilling it into something that easy to read, clear to understand, easy to digest. That's kind of when I start kind of like what you're saying of looking at it and being like, can I do without this gesture and will it still read? Like, that is a really important time to just also try things. Sometimes I will just like mute things like, hey, I don't want to see what it looks like without this. And sometimes it's better. So it is just a lot about simplification for me in that process.
Makes sense. You can tell who's good at acting and reference and who's not. I always have the opposite problem where I'm not doing that much on my reference, and suddenly I look at my animation, I'm like, wow, this is so boring. And I start thinking, oh, okay, what could help with this shot to add to, like, and then I like, I'm basically doing what I should have done in my planning and reference. I'm doing it after. So yeah, I'm learning about. And someone's just follow us. Sorry, like there's a sound that is like a Windows just crashed or something. That's Daniel who put that sound, and every time someone follows us, I feel like everything has just crashed. So if anyone can hear it, I'm sorry.
A little adrenaline rush.
Yeah, like oh my god. Someone here just asked, can someone explain why cliche is good as a good thing sometime? Because they are not sure they understood that well.
I think like it's not necessarily a bad thing always. Not necessarily it's a good thing sometimes. It's just not a bad thing always. Is the way I think about it.
Yeah, I think someone told me once, I don't know if it was a mentor or something, that sometimes cliches help to make it not relatable, but you kind of understand it very clearly. Because
yeah, that's the thing, like a cliche is like it's called a cliche because we all like read it and we understand immediately what is meant. That's like the two-edged sword in a way. Like it's bad because it feels like a go-to and everybody uses it, and it's therefore kind of cheap because it comes off as not very innovative, like an innovation. Sorry, English is not my first language, by the way.
I'm here with you.
You're doing it better than I can. Don't worry.
But then again, it can be very good because sometimes you need something that is really like on the nose to drive the message home. So, you know.
It's also sometimes with cliches, I find they're very general and very broad of an action. Like that, I think that's kind of like what we were talking about earlier, is taking a cliche and like making it different. Like everything's a remix, right? Like taking a cliche of like, you know, if I had $1 for every time I've seen someone do a body mechanic shot, like someone holding something heavy, put it down, go, whew, like they wipe the sweat off of their face, right? But it's like, okay, take that. That's very much a cliche movement. But could it just be like, oh, like maybe like they're itchy, or maybe they like itch their head or something, just to kind of have like the same feeling. And so it reads, but it's not that general of an action. Just adding specificity, I think, to cliches is a way to use them effectively.
Yeah, makes sense. Someone asked something here that I think is interesting. What's the difference between acting for animation versus just an actor? Do you guys think as animators we need to be doing something like not completely but different from what an actor would do?
I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I mean, like most of the time when you're shooting reference, you have the audio ready for for example, and you kind of have to act to this. I mean, Madison, you earlier, like you said, like sometimes you have to like just abandon the audio and just do your own thing. For me personally, that doesn't always work because I just tend to stray too far. But I don't think it's that far from actual acting because you still try to get into the performance. And I mean, you come up with the performance, really. You get some certain beats from the storyboard or from the director, like they tell you what they want, but you are still the one coming up with the performance. So it's not that far from real acting. And technically one could say then that makes us paid actors, but I'd still say it's still not exactly the same thing because
we earn less
for
money.
example, we don't actually speak the audio. We don't decide on these acting beats that are in the audio, for example. We have to work with what we get.
Yeah.
I also think too, like sometimes it does depend on the style of the project that you're working on, of like how you act. Because a lot of times, like I've worked on some projects that it's very subtle acting, and like I've worked on other projects where it's like musical theater, baby. Like it just depends on each one, like depending on which your acting does change. Like I find for me, it does very much change of like how broad I'm going to be with certain things, or like, you know, because that is one thing I would say initially, like on initial hearing that question, it's like, oh, well, I think more with like, you know, live action acting, theater acting, even. With animation, I tend to make my things a little more clear of like how I talk. And like, it's very much like a stage presence for me rather than like film acting. Like film acting, you can get away with a lot more subtleties, I feel like. But with acting for animation, I try to be a little more broad with my actions and my just acting overall and my emoting. So that way it just translates a little better for me personally in my workflow, like getting it to Maya. Like there are things I'm like, okay, I'm not going to miss this. It's not going to get lost in the subtlety. So that is a little way that but again, that does change like project to project, just depending on what the acting style is. So.
And what the rigs can do.
Yeah. If you have a nose control or not, like, you know, like just depends. But yeah.
For me, a big pet peeve of mine is cartoony reference. When someone is trying to do like, you are not gonna come to me. And like that is like, to me, I despise that just because it's very like, no, you're not trying to copy yourself again. Like you're just trying to refer back to the original intent of your performance. And I think that's really, really important. And interestingly enough, on my very first project, Hotel Transylvania 3, we were told specifically that we're not allowed to use reference. I mean, I still used reference, but we weren't technically allowed to. And if you know Hotel Transylvania, it's an extremely cartoony show. You know, there's all sorts of, you can't really film reference for something like that. But I did a lot of acting stuff in it, and that was, I still film reference for myself, just be able to get ideas down, just be able to, you know, try and throw out a bunch of ideas just to see what would stick and what doesn't stick and what I like and what I didn't like. And then in my scene, that's when I then hand up everything just to make everything really like zany and cartoony and everything like that. So that was a very intimidating thing coming in and being told, hey, you can't use reference. And I was like, what? So, yeah.
What did you do when like there were shots where you just literally couldn't shoot reference? How did you plan it and execute it?
So that I can use a reference for, or I can use a thing for, if you want to hop to the,
yep.
I sent you with my reel.
On it.
One of the shots that I did on Spirit, which to this day is the hardest shot I've ever animated. I couldn't shoot reference for this, but I had to animate it still. And I'll show the shot and then we'll talk about it after. Are you sharing?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. So this is a shot.
That's my favorite trail song. Why?
Yeah. So that was a shot. And when I saw the layout, obviously I had to go change my underwear, first of all. And then second of all, I was like, okay, well, my planning is very, very acting based. My planning is very, very, you know, trying to figure out how the character would think and all that kind of stuff. And the same thing still applied at the very, very beginning of like, okay, what are the character feeling at the time? What's subtext, blah, 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 blah. luckily for a shot like this, there's not much subtext because it's a very surface level in terms of like acting. And for me as well, I don't draw very well at all. So I was trying to figure out, okay, well, how am I going to plan this shot? For me, I like to plan things with primitives, and I just went into the scene. And by primitives, I mean like cubes and cylinders and triangles and all that kind of stuff. And I went into the scene and I just kind of blocked out the shot, blocked out the choreography of the shot, based on my director kickoff, based on my lead kickoff, what I wanted the characters to be doing in the scene. And then I worked with my lead back and forth to kind of figure out the choreography of that, you know. And then once we kind of found out, okay, well, this is what's working with the horses. Okay, now what's going to happen with the girls? Because one of the major things that the director wanted was that, oh, I want the character to be kind of come around and the girl will flip on the back, and then the horse will be galloping backwards, and then she's going to flip around. And I'm just thinking to myself, okay, sure, we can do that. So I had to then get a primitive for her to kind of figure out how she's going to be, you know. And throughout the entire process, I'm thinking about what the end product is going to look like and how I'm going to go about how what I'm doing now is going to relate to what I want it to look like eventually. I took notes. I took, you know, I talked to myself, thinking like, okay, well, what can I put into the shot to make it feel a little bit